We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Evan Wittenberg. He is the EVP and Chief People Officer at Ancestry. Evan, how's your day going?
Great. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to dive into the conversation. I have so many questions, but before we get into it, if you want to start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, including you, where you're sitting in the world, your pronouns, and then what has recently brought you joy. This can be anything.
Sure. So I'm sitting in my house in the West Portal neighborhood of San Francisco, and we are just in the process of reopening our offices in downtown San Francisco and in Lehi, Utah, where Ancestry has offices. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And what brought me joy, it's been hard and wonderful to spend almost 24/7 with my family. I have three kids, 14, 12, and 6. And
Wow.
so, and my wife works at UCSF hospital. So, being home all the time, having them jump into, town hall meetings where I'm presenting to 1,500 employees has been great. And it's really made us all feel actually more connected, even as we're separated. So it's given me joy just to be with my family more than usual.
I love that answer. I could guess that there's never a boring day that goes on in your household. So keeps
Not
it.
at all.
I know that you've had a kind of a long career and a lot of rich experiences, but I want to ask your kind of why about your personal journey and what has really led you to be the leader of the people team at Ancestry.
Sure. So I think from as long as I can remember, I have always been excited about helping people reach their full potential. That includes myself. So I wake up every morning. It used to be more intentional, and now it just is habit thinking, what am I going to learn today? And how can I help somebody else be great today? And usually it's pretty satisfying to go to sleep at night because both of those are pretty easily achievable if you're focused on them. That brings me accidentally actually to the people function. That's where the work I do, which tends to be about leadership development, learning and development, creating environments of creativity and innovation. That work tends to sit in organizational life within a people team. And so that's why I'm kind of in the function I'm in. And I've had to learn some of the other parts of the function over the years that aren't my deep spike of expertise, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, creating spheres of creativity, making sure that folks are reaching their full potential and you're reaching your full potential is a lot on your shoulders. And I noticed on LinkedIn that you took some time to be a new role that I haven't seen on LinkedIn before, called the head of renewing and recharging for a few months, which I definitely appreciate. What led to your decision to take like a couple month career sabbatical?
Sure. Well, I started, my wife and I met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was running the leadership program at the Wharton School. We knew we wanted to move to start a family. We decided the Bay Area was a great place to do that, even though neither of us had spent more than a week here in our lives before that. And luckily Google was, they needed me. They called even before I was planning on moving because they were starting their leadership offerings for the first time and wanted me to create that and run that. But my wife was 6 months pregnant when we moved here, and I started working at Google like sprinting like you wouldn't believe. And we had our first baby, then we had another baby, and I just wasn't around that much. And it was really kind of sad for me and hard for my wife and the kids. So I went to HP for about 1.5 years and then decided that, that wasn't the right place for me and just said, I'm going to take some time off and reconnect with my family. I took my kids to school every day and picked them up every day, made their lunches, kind of like just spent a lot of time. And I thought it would be a longer period of time, to be honest, just to recharge and reconnect. But the minute I started taking meetings in the second month or something, everything moved pretty quickly. And the next thing I knew, I was at Box. So that was the time period. I wish it was 6 months, but it ended up being, I don't know what it says, 3 or 4 months of kind of just disconnecting and reconnecting with some of the, the core most important stuff, which is definitely family.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it was a very personal decision, especially where you were kind of in life as well. And having this experience now, I wanted to also ask, do you think it's kind of important for companies to really offer this as a quote unquote perk? I've heard of companies offering it. You could take a, couple months sabbatical if you've been there for 5 years, or do you think it's really a personal decision that someone should take the initiative to ask if there's any flexibility at a company? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so again, I did it leaving a company, so it was a little easier. The sabbaticals that companies can offer can be great, but it's hard because it's hard for people to disconnect.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconnect, a couple months later in the same place you left when everything's been moving on without you. So I think that can be tricky. I think it's great if you want to stay at a place and you just need to take a break. I think that can be a great option, and companies usually make you earn it by being there for long enough. But I also think it can be tricky and the work's still happening while you're not there. And so sometimes a clean break is an easier way to do that. Not better or worse. It might just be easier.
Yeah, it's a different path. And when you have that time, you have time to spend with family and also reflect on what is important. And I'm sure you were thinking about kind of your next step as well, even though you're enjoying your time too. And over this past year, we've all had a lot of time to reflect on what gives us fulfillment, what we want to work towards. And I want to shift to Ancestry's talent strategy and really ask you, how has your kind of strategy evolved over the past year in terms of how you're thinking about fostering and, hiring new folks?
Sure. Yeah. Well, a lot has changed, right? So let me start by saying the stressors of the last, and it's unfortunately more than a year now, right? But the last year and 3 months or whatever it's been, the stressors are extreme for everyone, but they're more extreme for some of our employees. Let's just be clear. So women are seeing the research I've seen, they're seeing a much more stressful time than men. Typically, I think the more intersectionalities you have, certainly for our Black employees, there's been a much more stressful time maybe than for our white employees. So somebody said at the beginning of the pandemic, and I liked it, so it's worth repeating, but it's not mine. We're all in a boat on a stormy sea, but our boats are different. And some of us might be in a little dinghy with holes in it, and some of us might be in a sailboat sailing along or a big yacht. So we have to remember we're all going through something together, but from different levels of privilege, if you will. And so we try to keep that in mind, the different kind of stressors that different employees have. Has it changed our talent strategy? Not really. We still need great people. We did decide about 6 months ago that there is some magic in our workplace culture, and we don't want to totally get rid of that. But also based on the assumption that everybody before the pandemic was expected to be in the office 5 days a week. And so we knew we had to add flexibility, but didn't want to give up our full workplace culture. And so what we decided was we will be in the office 3 days a week, the same 3 days for everybody every week, because we want there to be a buzz going on in the office and a reason to be there. And people you want to collaborate with are there when you're there. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of every week, we will be in the office. Monday, Friday will be flexible to work from wherever our employees find they're most capable. And I'll just share, this, but some people are dying to get back to the office and see people and get into that environment and get out of their closet at home or wherever they're working from. Others are like, I never want to go back, right? So that's what we decided for the company. The business may decide that kind of some percentage, up to 10% of roles, not people, might be eligible for remote work. And my team has a process we can run a role through and see if it can be effective remotely. And we might consider that for some roles. Data science, for example, very hard to hire, very hard to retain right now. We've decided some of those roles can be remote.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense, in meeting employees' needs where they are as well, since a lot of people have kind of feedback around what the new kind of workplace looks like as well, whether it's, in person, virtual, and it sounds like a hybrid model too. And part of the reason why for the 3 days in office, and it's for everybody, is around company culture, collaboration. And a big part of that, aside from your teammates, is your people managers and executives as well, people who are making kind of company decisions too. And I think measuring effective leadership, communication, leading with vulnerability are things that have really changed over this past year. And I saw one of your passions and expertises is in leadership development at all levels. So I also wanted to ask, in your opinion, what are the different skills that people leaders need as opposed to executives or folks who are in the C-suite or VP roles?
Yeah, so the first level of kind of formal role related leadership at a company is a people manager role. We would love to have leadership from all levels, right? Whether you're in a formal role related, but that's the first level where it's actually required. I think people managers need everything they always needed times 10, right? The ability to connect with people, to understand what they're going through, to really understand their drivers, motivators, and what they're feeling, while still being able to leverage that to get the work done needed for the company, or else none of us will be here, right? So that balance has always been hard. We created a program 3 years ago called the Ancestry Management Program. I just taught my session of it 2 days ago to the group, and it's really about how do you connect, how do you listen, how do you bond, and then how do you kind of manage the work while still developing careers and culture, et cetera. I don't think that changes when you move up the executive stack, if you will. Most of our executives are still obviously people leaders as well. You just add a little bit more of the strategy and kind of broad company level. And then when you get to the senior leadership team, which in my case, the eight of us who run the whole company at Ancestry, then you're thinking broadly. I'm not in that room to represent my org. I'm in that room to run the company, and that's a different mindset that you have to shift, right? Sometimes people, the first time in that senior most team, think my job is to represent the people who aren't here, who are in my org, and that's not actually the role.
Interesting. How do you think about measuring your effectiveness as a leader of an organization, both as a people leader and someone who's in the room with the 7 or 8 other folks making decisions? I think leadership is a little bit less tangible, so you can ask for feedback, but how do you kind of think about that? And also, have you had a really great kind of manager when you weren't kind of leading an organization that comes to mind?
When I wasn't leading an organization, is that what you said?
Yeah, when you weren't like head of your org. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So how do I think about it? Well, metrics are important. So we have our engagement survey. We do it twice a year. There's manager questions on there. There's leadership questions on there. So my team kind of rates me on how I do that. And then we have with the senior most team, I think the value I add there is my job is speaking truth to power, right? That's when you get to that table, sometimes you don't really hear what's going on. And part of my role is to make sure that we are all being as effective as possible to call out behaviors that may not be working, and to also make sure that I'm speaking for the voices that aren't in the room, that maybe aren't being considered. What's funny is in that table, sometimes what happens is, oh, we talk about this all the time. Of course, our company knows about it. And it's like, no, we talk about it all the time, but the company's never heard this. Well, let's figure out how to communicate it. Let's not assume people know things. So that perspective taking is also super important. So how do I measure my effectiveness? Am I helping the senior team that I'm a part of be the most effective possible, spend its time the most effectively and efficiently, and really hear the voices from all parts of the company before we make any decisions, not just be in our own little echo chamber. As a leader of an org, then I'm looking at my engagement survey results. Is our team, executing against our goals? We use OKRs. Are we hitting our OKRs? If so, great. And then how are we doing it? Is the how and the what both going really well? And our engagement survey is helpful in the what part, right? Are we doing it the right way? Are people feeling engaged, developed, motivated, excited, et cetera? So you had a second part of that question that I'm missing, but I think that was the first part.
Yes, absolutely. The second part of the question was, when you're thinking about your career, is there a standout manager that just
yes,
like they did a great job? They were not good, they were great.
Yeah, I guess I would say that one of the best things I learned about leadership was from not exactly my manager, but my faculty member at Wharton when I ran the leadership program there. Professor Mike Useem is kind of the leadership guru at Wharton and more broadly. And he and I worked together on the leadership program and on this program called the Wharton Leadership Ventures. He did something, he would bring all these amazing luminaries into the company to speak to his classes or to the whole company. And he did something amazing. They would come in and he would immediately, instead of kind of hogging them and getting the glory from being next to them, he would just, like General Peter Pace, who at the time was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military person in the land other than the president. He came in and Mike Useem said, "Evan, this is Pete. Pete, this is Evan." And then he walked away. And it was amazing. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so he would always do that. And it wasn't about him. He would connect people and make other people feel important and great. And so I used that when I got to Google. I did the same thing. And when I had Eric Schmidt come to the leadership program we were doing, I said, "Eric, this is, Rachel or Li Ming, who were, young folks on my team." And then I would walk away and they would spend time with, it's very empowering. And so it was a tactic, but it was a tactic built on deep humility and trust and respect and, kind of ego health, if you will. And I think that's a great place to lead from, right? Where you just remember it's not about you, right? It's about the team, and it's about helping the team be their most empowered and engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. feel like there are a lot of different ways that you can really empower people and train them and give them the best resources to succeed, and that's all you can do as well. I also know that some company cultures, you can have the best intentions, but you end up with what's called like a quote unquote nice company culture. And what I mean by that is, like, there was a Harvard Business Review article that published something about the hazards of having a nice company culture. So you are so like on a friend level with your teammates, and you're afraid to give feedback, and there is no healthy discourse happening. In your experience, how do you kind of proactively create a more than nice company culture, so you spark the innovation, have hard conversations, and talk about, like you said, like each of the positional kind of boats that you're in, and share that experience?
Yeah, I think the sign of a nice culture that HBR was saying it can be problematic, and I've been in a couple of those, is if the face-to-face interactions are quote unquote nice, but then there's all this behind the scenes talk about that, right? That's your sign, because there's probably some cultures where the face-to-face interactions are nice, and then there's no corner conversations that say something different, and that's fine. It's when the what's said to people's faces is different than what's said kind of when they're not in the room, that becomes a problem. And I've said, I've been at companies where I've called the company out in town hall meetings, like, we value being nice, but if you were really nice, if you really cared about this other person across from you, you'd give them honest, constructive, actionable feedback to get better. That's what nice means, right? Nice is caring enough about somebody to help them be their best, not smiling to their face and then complaining about them about something they don't even know that they're doing wrong, that they could be more effective in if you gave them that direct feedback. So, feedback is interesting. I definitely don't like being in environments where somebody thinks feedback is, I'm going to dump my kind of crap on you and you take it, right? That's not feedback. I like to say it like, real feedback is you think about how it's going to be received and how can I deliver it so that the receiver doesn't get defensive and then not hear anything I say. So if you're really nice and you really care about developing others, you give feedback directly, but in a way it can be heard and integrated so that somebody can get better. And that's, I think that's the ultimate kind of solve for a nice to your face, but mean behind your back culture, which I think is what you were asking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in a way that can be heard is really important to stress, because not everybody receives constructive feedback or just things that are hard to hear in the same way. And it's dependent on your relationship kind of to the company, and also to the person you're receiving it from as well. And constructive feedback is not mean. It helps the person be better, which I also love. And we talked a little bit about kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how everybody, has their own experiences coming into the office or coming to, virtually as well. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about kind of Ancestry's position on DEI. What are some of the goals or kind of new initiatives that you're working on right now?
Yeah, great. So, Ancestry has been around for 35 plus years, believe it or not. So we're a longstanding startup, if you will. We're about 1,500 people. Our headquarters is in Lehi, Utah. We have also a really big San Francisco office. And then we have international offices as well. So, we think about where we're starting from. Our headquarters is in a pretty, honestly, white state, where Utah apparently has the fewest women in the workforce of any state in the United States also. So those are just factors. We just did a talent availability study, so I know that kind of fresh. So what we're focused on now is kind of leveraging the pockets of strength we have. Where are things working well? Where do we have a really diverse, group of people in a team, and leveraging that. And I should say, when we talk about diversity at Ancestry, there's a couple things I should know. I call it I and D versus D and I, because inclusion is the necessary but not sufficient precursor to diversity. If you don't have an inclusive environment, by which I mean everybody can feel valued, feel a sense of belonging, and have an impact that they could be rewarded or recognized for, then it doesn't matter who you bring in that might add to your diversity, they're going to fail. Right. And then it just is a downward spiral where people say, see, I knew that wouldn't work here or whatever. So inclusion first, then diversity, which typically you look at kind of the numbers. And when we look at diversity, we don't think of anybody as diverse. We're all just who we are. But it's only in adding somebody to a team of people that you would add to the diversity or continue the homogeneity of that team. So we try to look at it at the team level, right? As an example, my org is 72% women, I think, in people and places. I could add to the company's gender diversity by hiring more women in my org, but that doesn't actually accomplish the whole purpose of diversity, which is sometimes the path the team goes through is a little bit harder and more frictionful, but you get a much better outcome for your customers at the end of the day, right? Or much better business decision. So in my team, when a panel for any open headcount comes up and I see all women on the, on the interview slate of candidates, I'm like, where's the diversity? And my team always laughs, is like, yeah, we need some men just for example, right?
Yeah.
So what we are working on now is we just rolled out learning paths for all of our directors and above. They're required. So 4 modules. The first one is allyship, for example. And each month for the rest of the year, there'll be a module of focus. And we're requiring our leaders to do that because they're leaders. They have to. The research shows, it's a little mixed, but most of it shows that requiring people to do quote unquote diversity training doesn't always have the intended impact. We're not going to require the rest of the company to do it. We will gladly offer to them and invite them in, but for leaders, they don't have a choice, right? They set the environment. They need to go through this. And so that's one of the things we're doing. We're also looking at how can we open up our funnel even more. We have a really diverse internship program. We're converting a lot of those folks, but how can we look at kind of our representation across the company and be better at that?
Yeah, I think that's so important, and also goes back to the intention of what do you mean by diversity, and who's on the interview panel and things of that nature too. And it sounds like having these programs in place, like the learning paths, and just making sure you're having these conversations, it's important. Again, these are tools. I'm probably going to ask about key metrics for success. Everybody is always wondering, how do I know if I'm doing a good job, or there's like a lack of kind of inclusion and diversity and equitable workplace, at work. What kind of indicators do you look at to see kind of the quote unquote ROI if we're thinking about this as like a product?
Yeah, so for years we've looked at pay parity, and we've had it for the last 4 years. You have to constantly look at it because it constantly changes. When you hire people from the market, you're hiring in pay inequity, and so you have to adjust over time to keep that. But on gender, we have pay parity. We look at promotion parity and performance rating parity as well, because those can be hidden things. Maybe you're paying people the same, but women are getting promoted faster than men, or vice versa, or performance ratings, for example. And then you have to apply a filter to, well, what does this data tell me? So I'll give you an example. When I was at Box, I got excited for about 5 minutes because in engineering, we had the same female population of software engineers that most of the tech companies do, which is still a very small number, but we were up there at the best of the worst, right, if you will, that in software engineering. And I was very excited because I saw that our women engineers were they were getting slightly better performance ratings and being promoted at a much faster rate than our male engineers. And for about 5 minutes, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And then I was like, wait a minute. That means that we're being too hard at the top of the funnel and not letting in just good women engineers to the company, because otherwise we're just letting in the superstars. We probably can really make a difference if we can figure out how to let in the good ones, not just the stars. And so, the metrics have to be interpreted. You can't just assume because you hit one, you're done.
Great job.
And it's an iterative process, right? Because like I said, you're never finished. It's never locked and done. So you look at retention rates of different employee groups as well. So, is there a higher attrition rate in your Black employee population than in your white employee? Those things give you signals that then you have to go do research and address.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then obviously, the numbers. Are our teams as diverse as they can be? And where do we have opportunity for adding diversity? I'll give you a story at Google years ago. The James Shruecki book, The Wisdom of Crowds, had come out. And everybody's like, oh, this is so cool. And Google's such a wise crowd. And I was like, hold on, we hire all our engineers from the same 4 schools. How is that a wise crowd, right? And so even in, background of education, it really matters to think about how do we get the most diverse team or crowd here that we can, so we can make the best decisions for our customers.
Absolutely. Data does not, speak for itself. You have to interpret it and also make insight-driven decisions to up-level your strategy and read between the lines as well. I think oftentimes with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or just whatever goals you have, it's just like, oh, we checked the box, maybe we're done with that. But like you said, it's an iterative process. I have kind of a couple more questions around your general experience. So not necessarily at Ancestry, Box, Google, you don't have to name names, but in your experience, when people are making all of these changes and they're trying to be better, mistakes are bound to happen, even with the best intentions. What are some of the most common mistakes you've seen at large companies in crafting their people strategy?
People strategy generally, or around,
People strategy generally.
IND? Okay. Um, well, I think there's a bunch. I think reacting to and making major changes based on a small vocal population is one. You have to be careful, right? You have to be careful of where your data is. Certainly, I've been at companies where a handful of people are just the loudest, and that doesn't mean that that applies to everyone. So using your data sets that are larger, like your engagement survey, is really helpful there. I think the second one, which I alluded to when I was talking about leadership at the top, is making decisions in a vacuum based on a level or a type of employee that you talk to on a regular basis versus based on the whole company's kind of ideas of what's going on and view. You know, the people closest to your customer have a lot more information about your customer and your product than the people sitting in the exec team, right? And how do you make sure you get that information shared more broadly so you can make better decisions as a company? What are some other mistakes? You know, I think in almost every company I've been in, especially if they've been in the startup phase recently, my org, the people in place org, can't do anything that's not actually that doesn't actually require management capability. So I can spend a lot of time and design the best performance management process and approach and system. But if our people managers can't sit down, listen well, deliver good feedback, have a career conversation, and have regular one-on-ones, none of that will matter. It will be a terrible experience to go through the performance process, even if I designed it perfectly kind of on the back end. So in almost every environment, putting in manager development of some kind, and often it's been pretty basic to start and then you add on to it, but giving your managers, who usually were pulled kind of out of a group of people because you needed a people manager for that team, and may never have had good modeling themselves, really empowering and developing the people managers so they can be great is one important thing. And I was at a company, by the way, that would do that, would pick people to be people managers, and if they failed, they'd fire them because they weren't good at their jobs. And it's like, wait, they were a great IC, individual contributor, and then you fired them because they were a people manager. So, for example, when I was at Box, I was like, I'm not going to do that. So we had, I think, 15 cases in my 5 years there of people managers who just weren't very good. We coached them, we developed them, they still weren't good. In one case, I even switched the team because I thought there was some kind of stuff going on with the team that maybe they'd be better in a different team. Didn't work. And in every case, we moved them into an IC role, not the same one they left, but another IC role, and they were great again. And, you know, that's for a variety of reasons, but let's go back to where I started. If you don't wake up in the morning with at least part of you thinking, how am I going to help somebody else be great today? You're never going to be a great people manager. And some people just don't, that's not the way they're built, and that's fine. They can be great ICs if they were great ICs before. So figuring out how do you have those hard conversations, move people, keep their respect and dignity intact, move them over to where they're good again, is a much better practice than firing people that you put into a role and they don't happen to be good at that role.
Yeah, empowering people with guidance and resources. Again, I was talking to someone else and we were on the same conclusion that there are born visionaries or just people who are really good at this thing, but I really don't believe that there are born people managers. It's something you have to learn, hone in on, and really get good at over time, and people are different. Also, nobody in my experience has stayed because of one person, but people definitely leave because of their manager or one person as well. So has a huge impact on the organization. My other question is around, I guess on the flip side, trends or common threads that you're seeing out in the world in organizations or conversations you're having at Ancestry. What is something that companies and individuals really need to hone in on and focus their either strategy around to be successful in the future? We've had conversations around hybrid work, flexibility, leading with empathy, but is there anything else that comes to mind as you're kind of planning for the future?
Yeah, not a surprise, but mental health has become the thing that we need to support our employees on. That was kind of slow rolling over the last couple of years, and it's just accelerated a lot in the last year or so. We moved our plan up and put in our mental health solution much earlier than we were planning to. We were planning to wait till the calendar year, and it was like, no, people need help now. Let's do it, right? And so there are a lot of good offerings that are more always available on your phone, whether it's, getting faster appointments or having levels of care based on your needs, or having some coaching and counseling that's, through an app to get you to someplace until you can talk to a person. So there's a lot of good answers out there now, but companies have been slow in adopting them. And I think over the last year, everybody kind of realized we better move quick here because our people need as much support as possible. A related point, but different, is kind of elder care, right? Kind of solutions is also a big issue. We're realizing, as the population is aging, a lot of our working folks don't just have childcare to deal with, they also have elder care to deal with. And companies have largely ignored that in the past. And so there are some good solutions now to helping support our employees in that. So those are the two I would say. I would also say, I think this is just a good practice, and hopefully most companies are doing it. But I think Google made a splash years ago and putting in kind of a death benefit, if you will. But if your employee passes away, how are you taking care of their family independence is super important. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but we've had that at Ancestry, and having a legacy benefit, as we call it, has been really, really helpful to let the teams that used to work with that person know that their people are taken care of, but also just to, take care of the extended family of our employees at Ancestry is super important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I haven't even thought about something like that before, but you want to be proactive about that as well. So I definitely appreciate that answer too. And we just on the podcast had someone talk about, she's a grief coach, and grieving is something that everyone will go through. So how your team supports you and how you communicate that is super important as well. And goes back to that communication piece too. Also wanted to ask, going back to the interview panel, if someone were to come across you in an interview to work at Ancestry, do you have a favorite interview question that you ask folks?
The number one thing I hire for the people I'm interviewing for, but I think it would be true for all levels, is learning agility. So I never hire an exec to do the job they've done before. I hire them to leverage their experience to figure out, in this unique environment with this unique product, this set of employees, this culture, this time in history, like what needs to be done. I actually hired somebody once, and they were like, "Oh, here are the 5 PowerPoint decks from my last 5 companies." I was like, "Oh my God, I don't care." Well, like, what? Why is that applicable, right? So learning agility is super important, and it gets harder as you get more expert to be in a learner mindset. And so I will often ask, tell me something, a new thing, a skill or ability that you learned recently. And it's kind of hard to fake that one, right? So sometimes somebody will say, "Whoa," and they'll stumble, or somebody else will say, "My wife and I just took up ballroom dancing, and I'm terrible at it. I have 2 left feet, but we have so much fun." And we're like, okay, willingness to engage in something you are not comfortable with, and you're not expert at, the more senior you get is an important piece. That's not the full scope of learning agility, but the willingness is a piece of it. And I assume if the capability is there as well, that they will have a chance to learn into how the world is changing quickly.
Absolutely. What's the most recent thing that you've learned?
Oh, wow. I am learning with my kids. I am learning a whole bunch of stuff. My son's in basketball camp now. I never played basketball. So I'm kind of trying to learn basketball, not very well. Yeah, I think I'm failing pretty much. I'm a little old to be learning stuff, but I'm enjoying it, and he's enjoying teaching me as well, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a pretty hard skill to pick up, but credit to you for diving into it. As we close out our time together, I always like to ask as well, if there's anything I didn't ask you that you want to share, or 1 or 2 key takeaways that you hope listeners who are listening to our episode today walk away from this afternoon.
I think the one thing I would share, which I tell folks about career, because everybody's thinking about career now, because everybody's thinking about quitting their jobs, and it's a real thing that's going on in the world. I think I have talked to a lot of people who are at what you would call the top of their career, right? They've made it, and everybody would express they made it, and they are deeply unhappy. Not every one of them, but a lot of them are deeply unhappy. And it's like, I was trying to figure out, why is this? And the reason is that I use a mountain metaphor for a career, right? We're all trying to summit our mountain, right? And everybody's mountain is different. Your mountain is a lot higher than mine. You have a lot more potential than I do, right? But we're all trying to get to the top of our own mountain. And why you might be unhappy when you get to the top of your career is you climbed the wrong mountain, right? You climbed somebody else's mountain. it's not that you took the wrong route. There are different routes up the mountain. There are scenic ones, there are dangerous ones, there are ones that will get you lost and waylay you. But as long as you're on your own mountain, it's good. When you climb somebody else's mountain, that's the problem. And there's a lot of reasons: peer pressure, family pressure, assumptions of what other people think of you, assumptions of what it will take to make you happy. But that's tragic, right? And so as people think about this time when they're re-questioning everything and think about what's really important, making sure that you're climbing the right mountain and that you're really figuring out what's important to me, what's going to make me happy versus external factors. I think that's highly, highly valuable. So you don't get to the top and then decide you really don't want to be there.
That is really sad, and that is a cautionary tale, but also a hopeful message to really dig deep and think about those questions about what's making you happy, what's motivating you, and it goes back to what you said at the beginning as well, in terms of when you wake up and the questions you ask yourself. Evan, it was so great to speak with you this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope this was useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of everyone to speak up, and we think it's a requirement for the organization to succeed. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much.